I thought, well, most of you know that I'm a citizen of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and grew up in Oklahoma, and so that's part of my ancestry, my family who crossed the Trail of Tears many years ago. And then Jesse, I figured Jesse could share a little bit more about himself. So Jesse, if you could share a little bit more about you.
Well, I'm from New York. My mother is from Georgia, Southwest Georgia, and I'm African American and Native American with a little Irish mixed in. My Native American roots are Siouan or Lakota, and which Monacans are Sioux. Monacan are part of the people, Dakota speaking people. What else? So I follow my traditional ways, my traditional Native American ways. I'm a pipe carrier, a sweat lodge leader, a sun dancer. So I follow my Native American heritage, spirituality. Also, I grew up in the church. I was raised in the AME church and in the Holiness Church of God in Christ, and so that's where we are.
Yeah, and ironically, I don't share this very much, but my first, because I was so young, but my first actual assistant pastor role was at an Indian Mission Church of God in Lawton, Oklahoma, because I was Baptist, but the Baptists weren't letting me preach. But I love Pentecostal people. They will just let you preach no matter what age you are. The Spirit's on you, they say, then they want to hear it, and that gave me lots of opportunities. And there's nothing more interesting than Indian Pentecostals. They are the exciting group because they're constantly mixing their native spirituality with the Spirit of God, and so it's a very interesting experience altogether. So some of you may not know that about me, but that's how I even got my start. So I thought that was really interesting to know Jesse's background too. So yeah, and I think that that's part of why we wanted to do this is to share a little, bring awareness around Native issues and why the Indigenous people of this continent are still something very, very important that we need to all spend time reflecting how we intersect with our Native Indigenous people and ideas and culture. And so that's hopefully what Jesse and I can present today. We just presented part of this in a Legacy International presentation on Wednesday to an international audience, which was quite interesting. And we wanted to bring this to you all and wrap this in the context of hope. But I wanted to start, and I wanted to do this after Thanksgiving holiday, just because I'm not trying to rain on anybody's parade. But there's an understanding that we all have about what Thanksgiving is, and most people that study anything about it understand it to be really a mythology or a false narrative when it comes to the Thanksgiving story. The original story of the Wampanoag people and the Pilgrims at Plymouth in 1621. It does seem to be that there was some sort of feast or something that did take place, but it's not like this. And this is the issue. The depictions are just kind of misleading all around. Here you have a story of the well, even in the picture of this painting, you see the mythology being propagated. And so what you have here is the Pilgrims in some way being kind and blessing the Indians. Now we use the word Indian, even though it's an ironic word, right? We're not technically from India, but it is pretty common among First Nations or Native American tribes, nations to say Indian. So that's if it offends you, I apologize. It's just how a lot of us still talk. But here you have the Wampanoag and you have the Pilgrims, and the story looks to be so gracious and such a gracious thing. But we all have to understand there's complexities to that relationship that existed from its very beginning. The colonists had weapons that Indian Native people were absolutely endangered. They knew that from the very beginning when they saw the effects of the rifle, that they were in trouble. And so it would be a very complex story and history. But one thing that is not complex is the eventual genocide of many nations, and the confiscation of lands. So that is a story that's seen throughout our American story. So in fact, here you have, in fact, the chief of this, at this feast, the chief of the tribe that's being honored, or however they want to put it, in 1621, actually in 2 decades, his son would be beheaded, and his head would be put on a pike at the top of that exact settlement that would hang there for another 20 years. And so that just shows you that a relationship that was tenuous at best is declining. And a lot of Native people take issue with the idea of the Thanksgiving mythology. This is more of what Native people will see. And they know that because we see the effects of it. Native people all over the country are corralled onto small plots of land and have been removed from their homelands. So, and many tribes are completely gone. So, in fact, it's a miracle that the Monacans are as strong as they are. It's an absolute miracle, and their stories, in that way, is resilient. But many tribes have gone through the same thing. The Thanksgiving, and this is the thing, I think there's an innocence we see to Thanksgiving. So we grew up, in all of us, we all went to school, we played Pilgrims, we played Indians, we dressed up, or we colored pictures, or played parts and roles in different little dramas and plays. But the truth is that what happens when you begin to tell a story where Pilgrims and Native people are on the same footing, equal footing, and that they embrace one another, and that they found common ground and solidarity at the beginning of civilization. Again, civilization. I mean, the whole thing. When you even look at the Thanksgiving story, you do not think of the Native people as the Americans in that story. Most of us always think of the Europeans. That's the beginning of America. The Europeans are the beginning of America. And so it's never an equal footing from the Native perspective. And when there's a story that's kind of generationally being told over and over, and people are playing their parts, and as if it is a beautiful story of gracious host and gracious giving and taking care of one another, it nullifies today's Native grievances. What it says is that in the beginning, everything was fine. And it just never was like that. That just wasn't the story that Native peoples and the Wampanoags absolutely have been insulted by over and over. So they have been fighting, as you all know, and had declared this Thanksgiving a day of mourning. And many other tribes have joined in with that grievance. And the entire New England, I know, Native Coalition declares it a day of mourning. And so just to be aware of that, just to be aware that the Thanksgiving mythology has negative effects when we continue to pass that down to every generation after it. It's like the slavery and the Emancipation Proclamation and how we treat the Civil War. And there's all sorts of very interesting parallels when you kind of create a mythology around some sort of heroic act by the European or the in this case, the aggressor. But anyway, we want to
jump in there, Dan.
Oh, please do.
Can you go back to your original picture?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that picture. No, not that picture. The fighting picture. Yeah, because you mentioned that one of the problems with the early coming together of the European and the natives was the fact that the Europeans had the gun, which gave them a great advantage technology-wise. But that I think was worse than the gun and worse than the cannon was the original pandemic that Europeans brought to this country with them. That original, that original pandemic that Europeans brought with them. So when the guy who made Lynchburg, when Lynch came to Lynchburg, there weren't that many Monacans here, because before Lynch arrived, that pandemic had arrived and had wiped out so many Monacans that when he came here, he just saw what was left over, the remnants of the Monacan people that were left over from that original pandemic. So all over the country, in America and South America, in Central America, Native people have been wiped out by that original pandemic.
Yeah, that's a great reminder, especially the Wampanoag people too. I mean, within, I think they said 2 years or a year, I think tens of thousands had died due to illness. Yeah, thank you for reminding us, Jesse. Well, and this brings up this part, right? What did earthborn cultures or indigenous people? Now we're all from earthborn cultures originally, and I use the word earthborn to mean the closest to the earth. You have your culture embraces the earth, and is still part of that. We all descend from such tribes, indigenous tribes originally, but many have, I'm not going to use the word evolved. I think I accidentally used that in our last time. It's not evolution. It's just a change, a transforming into something that exists almost as an opposite to the earth. And so in confrontation to the earth. And so when we think about Native peoples of these continents here in the Western Hemisphere, they're easily considered Earth allies or Earth siblings. They see the Earth as part of their family. They don't, or the Earth is their mother, and all of creation is part of them. And so they're in some sort of syncopation, harmony with the Earth. But what has happened with conquering and colonization, imperialism coming into the continents is that it's forced Native people to become Earth protectors. That was not their role in the past. They were all symbiotically living with the Earth, and now they're forced to become Earth warriors. And so this has changed. This has changed indigenous cultures, and to become protectors of the earth itself, keepers of the earth. It's like standing in for a sibling that's being attacked, or their mother being attacked. And so this becomes a very, very personal, I think, journey for many Native tribes. And Jesse, if you will, tell us a little bit about one of the most, this is pretty recent history at Standing Rock, and since that deals directly with your tribe, the Lakota, maybe explain a little bit about what happened there and what's going on. Jesse, you're on mute again. Sorry about that.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, good. All right, so taking off from where you were talking about, because all people are from earthborn cultures all over the world, the problem began with the Greeks and Alexander the Great and the Romans, the Greco-Roman culture. The Greco-Roman culture came to a point where they no longer recognized the earth as being equal. They decided that man was superior to the earth, that man was the raper of the earth, and that man had these powers to rape the earth. So that's where it started, with this Greco-Roman culture. And this Greco-Roman culture got passed on to England and passed on to America and to Canada, this French, English, Greco-Roman culture. And so it's still lasting today. We still are under this Greco-Roman culture where the male of the house is the be-all and the end-all, and that, white men are the be-all and end-all. And so it's part of the same Greco-Roman culture. And so what happened was that an oil company from Canada wanted to bring down oil from Canada and sell it in the Gulf. And they wanted to bring it down via these oil pipelines. And so originally they had planned to build the oil pipeline from Canada and then right down across the Missouri River in front of Bismarck, North Dakota. Well, Bismarck, North Dakota is a city of white people, of white men who are ruling Bismarck. And when these white men saw that this oil company, these other white men from Canada, wanted to put this oil line across the Missouri River, across in up above their city, they were like, no way, you're not going to put that oil here. There's no way that you can put that oil above our water system. So since the white men disagreed, then the other white men in Canada said, okay, we won't put it across your city. So they took the oil pipeline down and put it in front of the Native American reservation called Standing Rock. They wanted to put that oil going across the river in front of Standing Rock. And so the natives, like the white men in Bismarck, the natives said, no, you can't put that oil rig, that oil pipeline in front of our water, coming down in front of our water. But the white men didn't say, okay. They said, no, we're going to put it there anyway. So this is what I'm talking about. So the battle still continues. They haven't put the oil across that river yet because Barack Obama, a Black man who, although has been Romanized, he still isn't completely Romanized. And so Barack Obama said for ecological reasons, he put a stop to that oil line coming across the river. Barack Obama gets out of office. Of course, Trump gets into office. Trump, Greco-Roman, male, signs a paper saying, yes, you can put that oil rig, that oil line across the river in front of that Native American reservation. Even though the Native Americans have a legal standing right over what happens in that country, Trump said, yes, you could put the oil rig. So the courts got involved, the Supreme Court got involved. The Supreme Court refused to overturn the lower court, which said, no, you can't put that rig there, I think until 2023. You can't put that oil across there until you do further ecological studies. So the courts have put a stop on it just until 2023, I believe. And then we'll see what happens after that. But that's where we are with Standing Rock.
And Jesse, just so everyone knows, I mean, this is your reservation too, right? And this is a place you've been and lived.
Oh, yeah. I lived there. I sweated there. Yes, this is a place where I've been and stayed and lived for a while.
And I think for just so everybody else knows, between Native tribes, to be honest, there's a lot of infighting or competition in many ways, which I don't need to blame anyone else for that right now. But this was Standing Rock was actually the moment, I think, of the building of a solidarity and coalition between so many tribes, and to join with the Lakota at Standing Rock, and that includes the Choctaw and so many others that have come together, and non-tribes. I mean, the outcry was so large on this that you have all sorts of people standing against it, and I think that's
you had cities from the West Coast to the East Coast signing petitions not to, the cities were signing petitions for them not to put that oil across the river in front of Standing Rock.
Thank you, Jesse, for sharing.
So it's such an obvious wrong because, number one, this is Native American land. They should have the right to say, just like Bismarck had the right to say what oil or what features can happen on their land. And we have treaties. We have legal treaties, legal documents that say that the Indians have a right to say what happens on their land. And they're going through with this anyway. So it's so obvious that this is a wrong. But because these are Indians, it doesn't make any difference. It doesn't matter.
And that kind of segues into my own, I guess, topic is with Oklahoma, which is a very recent decision that you all may be aware of, that the Supreme Court upheld the sovereignty of the Muskogee Creek Nation, which you see right there in the center of Oklahoma there. There are 5 tribes. You can see them there: Chickasaw, Choctaw, Seminole, Muskogee Creek Nation, and the Cherokee Nation, which all have original treaties with the United States for the land. And there's a lot of irony it's not as cut and dry as what it even looks here. Originally, that whole area, the swath of Oklahoma, was called Indian Territory, and it was only 2 tribes at one time, and then it became more and more and more. Now it's 39 tribes share Oklahoma. But we're only discussing the 5 tribes. These are the first 5 that all came across in the Trail of Tears. And what happened was, because the Supreme Court ruled that the Muskogee Nation is a sovereign nation with reservation rights, it also showed that all those 5 really are under the same. They all signed the same treaties at the same time, and so it was after the Civil War. And they signed the last treaty for this particular boundaries. But anyway, what does that do? So 44% of the state of Oklahoma is technically, and can be proved in court, obviously now, are actually not Oklahoma. It is sovereign nations. And so this is, of course, scared a lot of non-native Oklahomans, just because their cities are some major, commerce and trading centers, and their own land. A lot of people own land on these nations. They feel might be in jeopardy. The nations have all said that that's not what they're wanting to do by asserting or retaining their sovereignty. But it is a great dispute in the state of Oklahoma. Oklahoma government is working very hard to try to nullify somehow and disenfranchise 44% of the state. So it is a very, very, very serious situation happening right now. But many of us are excited because the Supreme Court upheld what many of us already felt and knew, that these were sovereign nations. And so it's a win for these tribes. But there's so many other tribes in Oklahoma. Oklahoma is a very, very strange history. So here's 5 tribes, but you still have 34 more tribes officially in Oklahoma that have lands and aren't even talked about because their treaties were signed later. So there's a lot happening, and it all has to do with resources. So and this is part of the issue. The reason we bring this up, the reason that Jesse and I feel very, very strongly about bringing up some of you may not have known all that, and you may not be aware of all that's being affected by these rulings. Right now, the Supreme Court is keeping that pipeline from being built and is protecting the sovereignty of the Lakota people at Standing Rock. Right now, the Supreme Court decision is maintaining the sovereignty of the 5 nations in Oklahoma, which is 44% of the state. But that doesn't mean it can't change at any moment. We know how history works, and unfortunately, things can change on a dime. And so I think that what we wanted to do is to bring awareness around this, and then also to have us, how do we act on this knowledge of all the tribes? There's hundreds of tribes in the United States alone, hundreds of tribes, hundreds of languages still spoken, native languages. But many are dying every year. I think you have 3 languages die per year in the United States, native languages. So there is much to do, and we wanted to encourage all of us to apply some of this indigenous wisdom. And I think the first thing we talked about was that we want everyone to spend time learning the native stories and histories of the people where you are. For us, it's the Monacans here. I don't know if everyone's aware of all the intricacies of that people, like Jesse brought up, losing a large part of their population. The last native speaker of the language of the Monacans, which the language is called Tutelo, died in the 1980s in Canada. How did he end up in Canada? There's a whole story there. There's a story of constantly pushing people out. Why is half of the Monacans here in Amherst County and the other half in Maryland? There's a story there. Do you know the story of the people of whose land we occupy? And so these are things that are important to begin to understand. We cannot lose our connection to the native indigenous folks where we're at. And Jesse's big on this. He's about inviting indigenous people to the table. Jesse, I'll let you talk about that if you'd like to.
Inviting Indigenous people to what?
Hold on just a second.
Tap to speak. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah, Michael's giving me a little bit of trouble. My apologies. Inviting earthborn cultures to the table, acknowledging their land and spending time with them is part of, I think, our duty. I mean, think about Jesus spending time with folks all around him, not just the Jews, right? It was moving beyond to the various groups of people that are around him. And so is that something that we're making a priority in our own community for yourselves? And so that there's a lot of knowledge there. There's a lot of pain there, and there's stories there that we want to learn from. But finally, it's finding balance and harmony. I think that that's the greatest thing we can take from our Indigenous people is they live for harmony. I mean, that's part of the idea. Not that they weren't warring with each other at times. That's obviously part of reality, but and fighting over resources at times. But it's definitely a deep understanding of the need for balance and harmony. And so that's something that we don't want to
I have an
forget.
Indigenous story.
Go ahead, Jesse.
I have an Indigenous story, a story of the Dakota people, because we have 7 ceremonies, 7 sacred ceremonies. And our most sacred ceremony, the highest ceremony, is called the Sun Dance, where we dance for 4 days and where we fast for 4 days and 4 nights. And we dance from sunup to sundown. And one of our songs in this ceremony, this week-long ceremony, is called the Commitment Song. And it goes with Chashalawan, Tewachilakun, Wanweglake Kasaunse, which means, once I knew a man, sacred to my heart. Now he's gone, but I'll see him again. So that Sundance Lakota Sioux song, is very reminiscent of Christ and the hope of Christ and the hope of seeing Christ again. Because who is that man that's gone? We don't know, but we know that one day we're going to see him again. So this is just going back to your theme on hope. This is a true Lakota story on hope.
Thank you, Jesse. Yeah. And even from Romans chapter 8 that we just read, which I think is one of the deepest aspects because it talks about creation and we're a part of that, right? And when Paul wrote that we know that creation has been groaning in labor pains until now. And not only creation, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly while we wait for, and then you can replace what we're waiting for. Paul said adoption, Paul said redemption, but in the end, it is reconciliation, right? It is harmony again. And so let us take a moment and think about the season, just like Jesse talked about, of where we're all striving in for that hope. There's a hope for a better day. There's a hope for a strong, peaceful future.